What went wrong in the Philadelphia 76ers series that had the Nets getting swept out before it felt like even things really got started? Some things that we saw were kind of symptomatic for what was happening the rest of the season. We'll break down the three stats that defined the series and the playoffs of the Brooklyn Nets. But first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Doug Norrie, the owner and operator of DFSR.com, daily fantasy sports rankings.com. If you need projections for FanDuel, DraftKings, whatever DFS site you're playing, go head over to DFSR.com. We got you covered there every single sport, every single day. No Adam Armbrecht today. Probably not for the rest of the week, my man. It's got some life stuff going on that all kind of catches up with us over the time. And sometimes when you enter the off season quicker than some other teams, a little slower than, depending on where you are in the general NBA landscape, sometimes you grab a day or two. And that's where Adam is today. No problem. We got tons to discuss. Like I said, during the off season, as we roll into it here for the Nets. We talked a little bit the other day around like some moves that maybe defined where they were at the trade deadline. We talked a little Dame Lillard yesterday, so make sure you go back and check those out. We'll take a look later this week at some of the other stats that kind of define the NBA or the Nets season. But today I wanted to just take a quick look back at the series against Philadelphia and some stats. I think three stats that we can look at that point to where the Nets are as a team and point to sort of things that need to get probably just sorted out during this offseason, things that we'll have an eye on this offseason in terms of where the team can improve, what they should be doing, who they should be targeting, and just how they should be putting together this team as things go forward. And I think in some ways, when we look back at this Philly series, which, like I said, was a sweep and was disappointing, there were some numbers that if you are a Nets fan and you've been following this team for a while now, you know that these numbers are sort of symptomatic of problems the Nets had during the course of the season. Things that these weren't new. Some of these things weren't new. Some of these things, in some ways, just ended up defining sort of who they are as a team. So I wanted to look at those numbers a little bit here as we roll through the offseason and kind of sort of just get a landscape view of, where the Nets are as a team. The first one has to do with pace. So we went into this series talking about how the Nets, one of the ways that we thought the Nets could, push the Sixers or at least make the Sixers sweat a little bit. I don't think we ever thought they were actually going to beat the Sixers in any reasonable fashion. But one of the keys that we discussed going into the series was the Nets were going to really have to push the pace and keep the tempo up against Philadelphia, because getting into a half-court slog with the Sixer team was going to be really, really problematic, especially for the way the Nets ended up being built. That ended up not happening. So the first number I wanted to look at is pace. If you look at the overall pace of this series, it was the slowest. It was just the slowest pace series. Both Brooklyn and Philly ranked last in pace for the playoffs so far. Now, of course, they're going to have the same pace numbers because that is they just played each other in those 4 games. But that is really not where the Nets wanted to be. The Nets wanted to be creating turnovers, which they by and large did. They were able to create turnovers. It was just that, the Sixers had a higher turnover rate than the Nets at 14.6 to 13.6, but the pace was so slow at 90.5 that it wasn't like the Nets were really taking advantage of those turnovers and pushing the ball up the court at all in a way that could, one, cross match some of the Sixers defensive assignments, really get Joel Embiid out of the mix for the games that he played. Those were ways that the Nets were going to be able to neutralize, we thought, possibly neutralize some of what the Sixers were bringing on defense, but it ended up just not being the case at all. The pacing of this game, the series was super, super slow. That really, really favored what the Sixers want to do defensively. And in the end, that's just not where the Nets could be in terms of overall functioning as a team. Now, look, is it in their DNA to be fast? No, but we were hoping we would see a situation where the Nets would be able to sort of maybe change up their philosophy, change up their style of play just a little bit, because it was going to behoove them to try to do it. Now, of course, with pacing, this to some degree is reliant on your personnel. And if we're looking at pace as a problem area for the Nets, I think we can look, first and foremost at where they were in terms of guard play. The primary, really only guy that they had playing any minutes in the series that even resembles a point guard was Spencer Dinwiddie. And Dinwiddie's game is not overall built toward a really, really fast-paced style. I think as they go into next season, this has to be something that changes for the team. I think they have to get more dynamic guard play, whether that's through, free agency, whether that's playing guys like Edmund Sumner, who they didn't want to play at all, getting Ben Simmons back. I mean, clearly Simmons is a pace pusher. Even when Simmons was not at his best, he was still pushing pace. Even off makes, he would really, really get the ball up the court. I think those kind of changes, especially if the Simmons were to come back with any semblance of health, could begin to put pressure on defenses. And by the way, playing with an up-tempo pace like that can sort of at times overcome sort of deficiencies in the half-court game, because you're getting teams essentially on their back heels. The Nets needed to be able to do that in the series. They didn't do it at all, and it really, really cost them. Now, again, they weren't built personnel for it. Now, that's, you want to look at a high level, you blame Sean Marks and company for that. But, if they saw this as an in-between season, that they weren't going to be a fully formed roster, maybe that they thought they were going to get Ben Simmons back. I mean, there are a lot of what ifs that can go into changing this number a little bit. But that was a really, really problematic number. It played completely into Philly's hands, and it's something the Nets just need to change going forward too. It's just, yes, it happened in this one series, but in general, we know this to be sort of problematic for this team as it is. When you are a bit outgunned on the offensive levels like the Nets were, they have to be trying to take advantage in other facets of the game. And that's just not something that happened at all in this series. So the first number that really showed a problem area for the Nets was the pace. There were other problems for this team as well. We're going to get into those in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head over to eBay Motors. With the eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or your money back. Just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. And when you shop at eBay Motors, you're going to get 122 million parts to choose from. You'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, second stat that reared its ugly head in this series and was something that you would say is probably a problem for the Nets just overall on the season was that offensive rebounding rate. The Nets, obviously, if you watch this team all season, you probably spent, at least some time ripping your proverbial hair out around just the team not being able to rebound on a level that felt anything close to reasonable, right? So part of this is size, part of this is just probably overall scheme. Some of this was just the way the team was built. Some of this is just philosophy. Some of it's just probably straight out hustle. Maybe a lot of it's just straight out hustle. But when you look at the offensive rebounding rates for what the Sixers did compared to the Nets, it was just one of these things that if you followed the team all year, you knew this was a problem. You knew there was a good chance this was going to be just a real big problem area going into the series. And guess what? it was a disaster for the Nets. Right now, through the 4 games that the Sixers played and as the playoffs go on, the Sixers had the second best offensive rebounding rate. Honestly, the best right now is the Knicks, which is pretty surprising considering they're going against the twin towers of Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. But Sixers right behind them, 36.8 offensive rebounding percentage. The Nets, on the other hand, offensive rebounding percentage was dead last in the series, for the playoffs at 17.3. Look, we know that this was a problem all season long for the Nets. They struggled on the glass. They didn't have a ton of requisite size. They went small ball lineups a lot just because they didn't want to play Day'Ron Sharpe a lot of minutes when Nick Claxton was off the court. They wanted to try to go a little more 5 out at the times when Claxton wasn't on the court. This was just a problem area. Now, I will say this wasn't all Joel Embiid, because you might look at this and say, well, they have Joel Embiid. We're always going to be outsized. We're always going to be sort of outmanned in that style. But you really, for this Nets team, can't use that. You can't just go Embiid for that as the excuse problem area for the team, because this was more than just Embiid. And by the way, it's not like Embiid gets tons of offensive rebounds, but he has so much gravity to him on the offensive end that it did allow for players like PJ Tucker to really up their offensive rebounding game in this series, because he was essentially just left alone. They were going to leave him alone on the defensive end when they were doubling Joel Embiid, and Tucker did find himself sort of just free on the baseline for lots and lots of possessions. Another area that you probably, as you were watching this series, thought to yourself, like, how is PJ Tucker getting another offensive rebound? This is absolutely crazy. It's not just like all Tucker. It is like the tension that Embiid did actually draw on the defensive end. But where that kind of starts to fall down a little bit is just in terms of that last game where Joel Embiid didn't even play. We saw B-ball Paul get in there, Paul Reed, and he grabs 8 offensive rebounds in his 32 minutes. No Joel Embiid anywhere to be seen. So it was kind of like personnel independent for who the Nets were facing. They just got crushed on the offensive glass all season long. They got crushed in opponents' second chance points all season long. We know this to be the case. It was something that, again, just not to sound like a broken record, drove Nets folks absolutely bonkers all season long. It felt like even on defensive possessions where everything held up okay, and it felt like, hey, we're going to actually get this thing done on the defensive end, shot goes up, shot miss, reset a possession because the other team has grabbed an offensive rebound. It ended up just being the case in this series again. And the disparity on the offensive glass between these two teams, again, was so stark and so alarming that it just confirmed your worst feelings and suspicions around what this team was when it was all said and done. And I said at the beginning too, like, offensive rebounding is one of those things. It's definitely personnel driven. I also think it's feel driven, and I think there is a skill to this part of the game. I also do think there's like a certain hustle element to this that the Nets just don't seem to like really have. I don't know. This is not necessarily quantifiable, and it's not something that you can go out and just prove. They just don't seem and haven't seemed to have guys that this has been part of their core sort of being on the basketball court kind of for a long time now. Like, they just don't seem to have this kind of guy that wants to go out there and scrap and fight and do everything you need to do to get an offensive board or sometimes even keep the opposing team off the offensive glass. Like, it goes both ways. Like, I just don't know. It's really, really hard to put a finger on it. I don't think it's all size. I really don't. I think size is part of it for sure. Being undersized in general is going to make it harder to get rebounds. But to me, if you've watched this team for a while, it does feel like there is something else here. Like, there feels like they haven't had this kind of guy that wants to get after it on the glass like all the time. And again, sometimes that's not just a size thing. We've seen in these other series, and in some ways, I think it does have to do with like sort of this grit and grind sort of mentality that I wonder at times if this Nets team, even in different iterations, has had. Like, if you watch some of these other playoff series that are going on right now, it does feel really like a stark difference in terms of the fight we're seeing out of some of these other teams over the last few games. Now, yeah, some of it's talent, but some of it does feel like straight up hustle. Like if you watch the Hawks and Celtics the other day, you just got this sense from the Hawks that they were, I don't know, desperate to not lose. If you watched the Heat with Jimmy Butler the other day, you got the sense they were just like desperate to not lose. Even the fight that Minnesota put up against Denver, taking them to overtime in an elimination game, or excuse me, 2 games ago, and then they only lost by 3 in the elimination game. You got this like different feeling around sort of like what the energy was. Yeah, some of that's talent for sure, but there does seem to be an energy thing. And I think at some point there is something to be said for sort of what's happening on the glass for this team. I think it's personnel, but I also just think it's just a mentality. And I'm just wonder if for a few years now, they haven't had this kind of guy that's really wanted to do like everything possible to get aboard. I think Claxton is fine. It's not really a dig on Claxton. It's like all these other guys, it's just not been something that's been a real big, important part of their game. So I think that's something else that I'm hoping the team addresses in the offseason, this idea around how they can just not have this be such a problem area for the squad going forward, because it's just like, I don't know. It was a problem all season long, and the offensive rebounding and frankly defensive rebounding was a problem area for the team when it was all said and done. Want to get into the third piece of this for the Nets in terms of numbers that kind of ended up defining the series. We will be getting into that here in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Ibotta Grocery. School shopping, getting a little something for yourself. You know you're already doing it. Why not get cash back for it as well? That's with Ibotta. You can earn cash back on every shopping trip. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care, even pantry goods. You just got to link your loyalty account, or you just upload a receipt after you shop and you're going to get cash back. It's that easy. The average Ibotta user earns $120 a year in real cash back and cover the cost of the entire shopping trip when it's all said and done. It's like getting one whole shopping trip for free. You can earn cash back on hundreds of online brands, retailers when you start with Ibotta. Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 for just trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDON when you register. Go to the App Store or Google Play, download the free Ibotta app, use the code LOCKED. That's IBOTTA, Ibotta, in the Google Play or App Store, and use the code LOCKED. All right, final stat. This one's pretty easy, but also ended up becoming what I would say, like, not define the team, but was an interesting problem with the team when we looked back at like who the Nets were getting in terms of personnel, and that's just defensive rating. Now, defensive rating is easy because it's just like, look, do we know the defense was great in the series? No, because they lost. I mean, like, how good can the defense be when you lose? So they weren't last in defensive rating, the Nets, but they ranked 10th overall so far in the they've ranked 10th overall when it comes to all these teams in the playoffs. The problem with the defensive rating here at 114.3, by the way, offensive rating 102.5. The problem with the defensive rating, and it's not tied to pace, but this is the other thing. It was like, if you're not going to play at a fast pace and hammer the other team's mistakes, and by getting them out in the transition, you really better hope you can hold up on the defensive end when it comes to half court offense. What might throw you off in this series is that it was it was really, really low scoring series, right? They lost the first game. Philly put up 121 points, but after that, Philly 96 points, 102 points, 96 points. Now you might say to yourself, oh, wow, it was a low scoring series. The defense was looking really, really good. But the problem with that number, or the problem with thinking that in terms of their defense, that the score was low, and therefore, like, the Nets were playing good defense, it doesn't really hold up. The scores were low because of what I said at the beginning when it came to those pacing numbers. That is actually more of why the scores stay low, not because the Nets were playing some sort of amazing defense. How do you know that? Because their defensive rating per 100 possessions was among the worst in the whole playoffs, even though we're looking at these scorers and saying to ourselves, oh, wow, they were really keeping, Philly from, just getting in the bucket. But that doesn't hold up on a per possession standpoint, right? So like when the pacing numbers are 90.5 and the defensive rating is 114.3, it's one of these things like, yeah, you're keeping the pace low, but you're not playing good defense in the times in this grinded out game. Quite the opposite. You're allowing Philly to sort of, in some ways, do whatever they wanted offensively when it was all said and done in a half court game that wasn't going to favor what the Nets were going to be able to go toe to toe with. So the defensive rating, and this throws you off too, because we looked at this Nets team after the trade deadline, and really what we thought they were going to hang their hat was just overall defensive efficiency with the personnel that they were getting back. Like they're going to have Nick Claxton, they're going to have Dorian Finney-Smith, they're going to have Mikal Bridges, and that's going to be where they are in terms of like just having a lot of length. Maybe we'll be able to muck it up on the defensive end. They're gonna they have guys who have been sold as good individual and are good individual switch defenders. They'll be able to switch basically 1 through 5. Like this is where we thought this Nets team was going to be. And we thought, hey, yeah, maybe there's not going to be great offensively, but defensively, yeah, maybe they'll be able to hold up because of these guys. Over the second half, or excuse me, over the Nets' last 15 games, the regular season, the defense was right around average at 114.7. That ranked 15th in the league. If you kind of back it up to go if you just go post All-Star break in terms of defensive rating, the Nets landed at 13th. So overall, I take the All-Star break to mean just like, once this team's kind of getting going and the trade deadline had already come and gone, and this is the new version of the team. Yeah, the defense was okay. It was average. For this team to really, really shine, those defenders, like I said, these guys before, because most of these guys, especially prior to the deadline or even now, are more known for their defense than their offense. I know Mikal Bridges ended up coming around in terms of that and sort of, taking a leap when it came to offense. But this was a team that when you were really looking at them from an evaluation level heading in to the second half of the season and then the playoffs, you said to yourself, well, this is a team that's going to really have to get by defensively because of their length and switchability and speed on the defensive end, their defensive acumen, their overall just defensive intelligence. That's where it was going to have to get done. But the problem is that defensive efficiency just wasn't good enough for what they lacked offensively too. Like for this team to just be average defensively. And I think that people thought that this, and I did too, that this would be a well above average defensive team when it was all said and done. And that just never ended up really coming to fruition. They never seemed to totally get there defensively. So I wanted to throw out the defensive rating because, again, I think you could tell yourself a story that because the playoff series was such a low scoring affair overall, that you would walk away from this saying to yourself, oh man, the Nets played this lockdown defense. It was where the offense that bit them. That is correct. The offense did bite them. They could not hit threes in the series. I could have easily just brought up 3-point percentage as one of the problem areas for the Nets, just because they couldn't hit threes for what seemed like the whole series. So maybe they go hand in hand, like maybe good defense or good offense helps you play good defense or vice versa. By the way, just to get it out there, the Nets shot 32.6% from 3 for the series. Not the worst in the playoffs, but 11th overall. So it wasn't like it was great. And that, like I said, that easily could have been the number 2. Like they just couldn't hit threes. But I just didn't want everyone's eyes to see those low scores in the series and think to themselves, oh, it was only the offense that let them down. That is true, but it wasn't like this defense on a per possession level was doing any great things. That just really wasn't the case. The defensive rating, like I said, was among the worst of any team in the playoffs. So yeah, low scoring series, but not necessarily a lockdown defensive affair. If you watch this team all season, pacing, rebounding, just overall defensive acumen. These were areas that needed to be addressed and need to be addressed going into this offseason, because functioning on a full season scale with these as some of the numbers is probably going to end up being really problematic for this team. And if you watch the team all season long, that this to some degree, these numbers are not new. This is the story of the Nets season, even at times when they had KD and Kyrie, because they were still having trouble in the offensive glass. They were still at times struggled defensively, But when you lose those guys, you don't get the gift of having elite offensive weapons on the other side either. So that ends up being the problem. So be interesting to see what the Nets do this offseason, how they address some of this stuff. If this is an operating thing that they want to just get better. And like I said, I mentioned his name before. It is funny how Ben Simmons does a healthy Ben Simmons, and this maybe that's just a pipe dream at this point. A healthy Ben Simmons is a guy that starts to chip away at some of these problems. He does start to chip away at pace. He is a good on-ball defender. He is a good rebounder. Like, I'm not saying he's the answer here, but it is funny how one player, and the case is Simmons here, at least when we saw him at his healthiest, and it's been many seasons since that's been the case. But he is a kind of guy that does start to address across the board some of the issues the Nets have. Doesn't solve every problem, for sure. No one player solves every single problem for a team. But if we look at what his core functioning is and what his best traits have been as a basketball player, those are some of them: pacing, rebounding, good switchability defense, ability to guard multiple positions, ability to get into passing lanes, ability to cause turnovers. It would be really nice to get that version of him back, because that would begin to start solving, I think, some of what the Nets problems were in this series. Okay, we will be back again tomorrow, taking a look at some more season numbers, how things were broke down along those lines, other things that the Nets are going to need to address into the offseason and going forward. And hopefully we don't relive some of the pain of the past when it comes to some of these numbers. In the meantime, make sure you're subscribed over on YouTube to Locked On Nets. Much appreciated, everyone that's rolling through the offseason with us over there. We will continue coming at you 5 days a week with Brooklyn Nets content. So make sure you are subscribed to Locked On Nets over on YouTube. As always, Adam is the one that brings in the quotes from the great American poets. I always come up just a little bit short by the time we hit the end of these solo episodes. So we'll just say Adam Armbrecht, one of the great all-time poets. And we'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.